Russia is at it again, and this time the warning signs came from beneath the sea. I'm Walter Benson, and you're watching my channel, Walter Benson. Before we begin, like this video, subscribe, comment with your view, and share it with others who follow global security and geopolitics. What happened in British waters was not routine naval movement. It was a covert Russian probe with serious implications for the United Kingdom, for NATO, and for the wider balance of pressure now building across Europe. According to the British account, Russian submarines moved toward UK waters with a mission that was never meant to be seen. The objective was quiet, technical, and deeply threatening. Moscow was searching for the undersea cables that keep Britain connected to the world. But the operation did not unfold the way the Kremlin planned. Instead of moving unseen, Russia's submarines were tracked, challenged, and exposed, turning what should have been a secret mission into a very public humiliation. The British say the operation involved far more than one submarine. Russia sent an Akula-class nuclear-powered attack submarine, and alongside it came two deep-sea submersibles linked to the main Directorate of Deep-Sea Research, better known as GEOG. The Akula alone would have been enough to trigger concern. These submarines date back to the late Soviet era and are associated with heavy strike capability, including anti-ship weapons and long-range military utility. But British officials did not believe the Akula was the true center of the mission. The deeper concern lay with the GEOG craft moving with it. Those vessels were the ones more suited to seabed work, covert surveillance, and technical interference below the surface. GEOG officially presents itself as a structure tied to oceanographic activity. In practice, it has long been viewed as a shadow arm of Russian undersea operations. It surveys the seabed, handles submerged equipment, and monitors adversaries. In this case, the fear was clear. Britain believed Russia was mapping the cables before any future sabotage attempt. That fear matters because undersea cables are not some hidden detail of modern life. They are the system beneath the system. More than 99% of transoceanic internet traffic depends on them. Nearly everything that moves across the world digitally, from financial transfers to private messages to military communication, travels through these routes on the seabed. Hundreds of cables now cross the oceans, stretching for hundreds of thousands of miles, and together they form the backbone of the global communications network. If those links are cut or disrupted, the effects would move far beyond inconvenience. Banking, commerce, command systems, intelligence sharing, and public communications could all be hit. Britain knows this, and Russia knows it too. That is why the cable issue is so sensitive. The UK is not just another coastline in this story. It is a major Atlantic node, a NATO power, and a state that has strongly backed Ukraine. From Moscow's point of view, damaging British infrastructure would mean striking a political opponent without launching an open missile attack. That helps explain why Britain believes the Akula was never the real instrument of the mission. It was likely the distraction. A nuclear-powered attack submarine attracts attention by design. It suggests danger at the highest level and forces any defender to think about direct confrontation. While that threat dominated the surface picture, the GEOG submarines could do the quieter work below, scanning the seabed and locating vulnerable infrastructure. It was a classic hybrid move. Use one military asset to imply escalation, then use another to gather the data needed for sabotage, coercion, or future pressure. The message behind it was also political. Putin has long relied on ambiguity, using fear and uncertainty to make rivals react before he crosses clear red lines. If Britain focused on the possibility of a military clash, Russia might gain time to complete its reconnaissance. But this time, the plan did not hold. Unknown to Moscow, British forces were already tracking the movement. The submarines were not disappearing into the dark. They were being followed, studied, and prepared for. The British response began with something deceptively simple. Sonar buoys were dropped into the water. These were not random instruments. They were signals. Britain wanted the Russian crews to understand that their presence had been detected and that their activity near underwater infrastructure was being watched in real time. Warships moved into position, and the message was unmistakable. British Defence Secretary John Healey later described it in direct terms. Britain saw them. Britain saw what they were doing. And any attempt to damage critical underwater infrastructure would not be tolerated and would carry serious consequences. That was a warning shot, without a shot being fired. It gave Russia a chance to back away, but the submarines did not immediately turn back. British planners were not surprised. London has dealt with enough Russian hybrid pressure to know that warnings alone rarely end the matter. If Moscow wanted to test resolve, then Britain intended to answer with visible force, sustained surveillance, and a level of exposure that would strip the operation of the secrecy on which it depended. By the time the public learned about the operation, British tracking had already been going on for weeks. Reports indicated that the UK first identified the Akula in international waters in the Arctic region. That early detection mattered because it meant the response did not start at Britain's coastline. It started far out, while the mission was still unfolding. Once the Akula's course raised concern and the two Juji craft were linked to the same wider movement, Britain escalated. The Type 23 frigate HMS St Albans was deployed and became a central part of the surveillance effort. The RFA Tidespring was also involved, helping sustain naval operations, while Merlin helicopters added anti-submarine reach and flexibility. The Royal Air Force contributed a P-8 maritime patrol aircraft, giving Britain a constant eye above the sea. This combination of ships, aircraft, and underwater detection tools meant the Russian crews were no longer hunting quietly. They were moving inside a net of tracking, one that could follow them day and night across long distances without giving them the freedom they needed. Then the response widened beyond Britain alone. Because the UK is a NATO member, a threat to its infrastructure quickly becomes an alliance matter. Allied forces, including Norway, join the operation. And what began as a British tracking mission grew into a larger multinational effort involving around 500 personnel. British aircraft logged hundreds of flight hours. Naval units covered thousands of nautical miles. The scale of the effort showed two things at once. First, NATO takes undersea infrastructure seriously, especially after years of warnings about cable vulnerabilities. Second, Russia had lost control of the mission. The Akula was the first to pull away, retreating before reaching British waters. That reinforced the belief that it had served mainly as a decoy. The real problem remained with the Juji submarines, which kept moving and spent time in and around the wider UK maritime area. But by then, the secrecy was gone. Even if they saw cables, Britain knew what they were likely observing. The operation had been stripped of surprise, deniability, and strategic value. That was the real humiliation. Russia did not achieve a hidden breakthrough. It mounted a covert mission that Britain says it spotted early, tracked across distance, and exposed before it could become operationally decisive. The Juji submarines eventually withdrew, following the Akula back north, and they carried home a message far more damaging than any tactical loss. President Putin had intended a covert probe. Instead, Britain publicly declared that the mission had been seen, monitored, and countered. Healey said Britain's armed forces left the Russians in no doubt that their movements were not covert, and that their secret operation had been exposed. Prime Minister Keir Starmer followed with a broader warning, saying Britain would not shy away from action when Russia tested its resolve. Ukraine moved quickly to amplify the embarrassment. Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha argued that the incident proved the scale of the threat posed by the Russian regime, not only to Britain, but to the wider North Atlantic region. In Kyiv's view, this was not an isolated intrusion, it was evidence of a pattern. That pattern is what makes this episode more serious than a single naval encounter. Britain and Ukraine both frame it as part of Russia's wider hybrid war against Europe. This is not conventional war in the old sense. It does not always begin with missiles, tanks, or declared battle plans. It moves through sabotage, cyber pressure, infrastructure probing, intimidation at sea, and manipulation of information. The goal is to create uncertainty, division, and vulnerability before any open clash begins. From that perspective, scanning undersea cables is not an isolated technical act. It is preparation. It is leverage. It is a way of telling an opponent that essential systems can be touched whenever Moscow chooses. Britain now appears convinced that what happened in the Arctic and near its waters was only one visible part of a broader campaign. That conclusion is shaped not just by this submarine episode, but by a growing record of earlier Russian maritime activity near British territory. The latest incident did not appear out of nowhere. It fits a sequence London has been watching for months. One of the clearest earlier examples came with the Russian vessel Yantar in the North Sea. Publicly described as a research ship, Yantar is widely regarded in the West as a spy platform, closely associated with the same kinds of undersea missions linked to Guji. For 8 days, the Royal Navy and Allied forces tracked it as it operated in the region before moving away toward the Faroe Islands. The frigate HMS Somerset was used to monitor its movements with radar and sensor coverage. Around the same period, British and Allied units also shadowed the Russian corvette Stoichi and the tanker Yelnya as they moved through the Dover Strait and westward into the English Channel. Officially, those ships did not carry out anything outside normal maritime activity, but the context mattered. Britain had reason to suspect pressure tactics, signaling, and probing behavior rather than innocent passage. Whether Moscow intended direct action or merely wanted to provoke reaction, the result was the same. Russian vessels were met, watched, and escorted under Allied scrutiny. London was already learning that the pressure would not come from one direction alone. Then came a more unsettling twist. In January, a Russian-flagged cargo ship called Sinogorsk anchored close to the coast of Somerset and remained there for 14 hours near several major undersea cables. Reports said the vessel was positioned dangerously close to lines including Exa Express, TGN Atlantic, and VSNL Western Europe. That raised a troubling question. Why would a civilian cargo vessel stop in such a sensitive area with no obvious commercial reason to do so? Britain responded by sending military helicopters, and soon after, the ship moved away. This incident suggested that Russia's hybrid methods may not rely only on warships or deep-sea assets. Civilian cover can complicate any response, because a stronger reaction would allow Moscow to claim overreach and play the victim. At the same time, maritime pressure is only one part of the campaign. Cyber attacks against the UK have surged since Britain openly backed Ukraine. British lawmakers have also warned of Russian disinformation networks flooding social media with false and divisive narratives. The strategy is broad: threaten cables, attack systems, distort public debate, keep pressure constant. So the submarine story is bigger than a single failed mission. It shows a contest already underway below the threshold of open war, where seabeds, data routes, shipping lanes, cyber networks, and public opinion are all battlegrounds. Britain's message was firm. It is watching, it can track, it can expose, and it will answer Russian pressure with Allied coordination rather than hesitation. But the deeper message is darker. If Moscow was willing to send an Akula and Guji assets toward British waters to scout vital infrastructure, then this was not a test of curiosity. It was a test of options. Today it was surveillance. Tomorrow it could be disruption. That is why this matters to NATO, to Europe, and to anyone who thinks modern conflict begins only when the first missile flies. If you value serious reporting, subscribe to my channel, Walter Benson, comment with your thoughts, and share this video. Because beneath the surface, the next move may already be underway, and no one can yet say where it ends.